All right, everybody. Good day to you. Welcome to another monthly edition of Calmly Considered here. I am Allan Bevere. I am the self-appointed Anselm of Canterbury Chair of Theology and Podcast Culture at Faith Seeking Understanding University, where all seekers are welcome to ponder profound things free of charge. And my conversation partner every month, as always, is as I like to refer to him, as the incomparable Michael Cruz. And he is the Grand Poobah Chair of Economics and Public Theology here at FSUU. So, Michael, it's good to see you. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Allan.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
We should probably talk just briefly about the Super Bowl because we always talk sports at the beginning. So it was a good game.
It
was a good game. I thought both teams played well.
Yeah.
I was glad to see the Rams quarterback. You know, when you spend 10 years, or was it 10 years he spent in Detroit? That's sort of like hell for football players, right? I mean, to be honest, the Browns aren't much better, but we're not the Lions either.
Right. So it's kind of like purgatory. You're sort of in, but you're not in.
Yeah, it's like purgatory. Yeah, it's like, after 10 years he was released, but in the meantime, it wasn't a pleasant experience.
Yes.
But and Joe Burrow, he's just going to be, he's in our division.
Yes.
He is going to be a gamer for a long time, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, him and Josh Allen and Herbert on the Chargers. I mean, there's some really exciting quarterbacks that come up right now. So it's fun. It's fun to watch.
It is fun. It is fun. So anyway, but it was a good game. I enjoyed watching it, and
it was. I much wish my Chiefs had been there, but
I said to my wife after the game. Of course, the Bengals now have been there 3 times and have lost all 3 times. Yeah. But I said, I know it would be small consolation fans. Consolation for Bengals fans, but this Browns fan would like to go to the Super Bowl at least once and lose it. Right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
So anyway.
At least they went. Yeah.
So. Yeah, at least they went. Yeah. Okay. So today, our topic is free speech and cancel culture. So we got a lot to talk about. I want to begin just having the conversation in reference to the constitutional conversation, because obviously, we have the First Amendment to the Constitution that guarantees free speech. So I want to read that, and then we'll have conversation. And it says, and by the way, the reason why we want to have this discussion is because we think, I think a lot of people misunderstand the First Amendment and what it specifically refers to. All right. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So the operative word here, it seems to me, at least for our discussion, is Congress. Congress shall make no laws respecting. So as you hear that, Michael, what does that tell you?
Well, and I think it's also important to remember that under the 14th Amendment, then you also have, I think that gets applied to state governments and other governments as well, that they also are not to do that. That's part of the constitutional right of being an American citizen. Right. Yeah. So we're basically talking about what it is that government does in terms of speech and what's allowed and what isn't allowed. And what happens in the private sphere is negotiated between private individuals and institutions as to what speech they're going to participate in or allow or not allow. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm a pastor and I work with staff, and I expect that my staff, being employed by a church, that we will not use profanity in public. Right. And so I'm not denying I am not guilty of violating the First Amendment, am I?
Nope, certainly not. Yeah,
I'm allowed to do that. Yeah. And so we need to be careful when we want to apply the First Amendment to private entities. Now, we do want to talk about in a little bit, I think, how, nevertheless, private entities, or let me say non-governmental entities. Let's say it that way. That's a better way to say it. Restricting free speech can be a problem. So I don't want to ignore the importance of that. But we do need to have some nuance and make some distinctions. So one of the things that concerns me, I've expressed this in writing, and that is I get really concerned when we start what I'm going to call sloganeering things. So cancel culture has become a slogan. I would say the same thing in reference to wokeness. It's become a slogan. And what bothers me with the sloganeering of these things is two things. First of all, one can use the slogan to dismiss a legitimate concern, right? Oh, that's just cancel culture, or that's just wokeness. It can also be used by those who want to affirm it in an abusive way. So everything becomes cancel culture. Everything becomes wokeness. You know, I say, as a Christian, it's important for us to take care of the poor. And someone says, oh, that's just wokeness, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I get really concerned when we start sloganeering, because I think when we do that, I just think we miss the finer details of exactly what is happening when we actually are having these conversations. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think it behooves people to speak as clearly as they can about what it is they're objecting to or affirming, rather than hiding it under these vague labels that are raised. It's sort of a parallel. It's a little bit different. But are you familiar with when they talk about the Mott and Bailey approach to reasoning? This is something I learned really recently. It was back in the Middle Ages. You had a castle, or not a castle, you had a fortress. The town lived in an area where they had a fenced area where the homes were and they conducted daily life. But then they would build this hill, and up on top they'd have a fortified area where they could get behind the walls and defend themselves if somebody attacked. And so the Mott Bailey idea is that you walk down and to the Bailey and you have discussions going on. And so I'll just to give an example how this works. So I'll say defund the police. So I'm in the Bailey and I say defund the police. And so then that gives the impression that what you want to do is take all money away from the police department, if you just take that literally. So then what happens is that somebody attacks. They begin to, well, we can't defund the police, we need so on and so forth. And so then you retreat to the Bailey and you say, oh, we didn't mean we're going to take all the money from the police. We just want more stuff for mental health care for people that are struggling. We want to do this. We want to rebuy some things. We never said that we wanted to take all the money away from the police. You're just overreacting, to what we said. And then as soon as the attack comes back, then you move back down into the mod again, and you begin talking defund the police, which has the language that's inappropriate. And so there's sort of this attempt to use slogans and ideas as a way to antagonize the people that you want to have that you should be having conversation with, as well as to stoke up the people on your side to hype the animosity on your side towards the people that you're trying to attack. So the Mott Bailey is just one example of that. But that's where I see the problem being, is people not being interested in trying to really engage in productive conversation, but just simply trying to one up their opponents.
Yeah, I like that. I like that example. And of course, you and I both know that antagonism always works in convincing people, right?
Yeah.
I have said for a long time that I don't think our political discourse is meant to solve problems. I think it's meant just for politicians to gin up their supporters, to make them angrier, to get more of them out to the voting polls. They just want to be reelected. And so I, as a politician who wants to be reelected, I have a stake in convincing you that you better vote for me because the Huns are at the wall.
Right.
Right. Right. And if you don't vote for me, oh my gosh, it's going to be a disaster. So, yeah. And that's really, I cringe so often when I hear politicians on both sides of the political aisle, the way they talk, and the way they just loosely talk about this stuff. Some of them may be using this language because they're just parroting what they hear, but I think some of them know what they're doing.
No, I think there is an intentional strategy that has developed over our lifetimes. I think going back to my childhood, I think things were a little different. I don't want to say it was, complete binary in terms of differences.
Yeah.
But I think over our lifetime, particularly since the 90s and going forward, there has been a movement away from the idea that the way that we get things done is that we get 50% plus one, and hopefully a lot more than 51%, try to get consensus around whatever action we're going to take. And then we pass that action. That's how we move forward as a society. Instead of trying to get the 50% plus one, what we try to do is to gin up our base as hard as we can out on the extremes to get them more motivated to get out and vote, so that everything becomes about getting your extremists on your side most motivated, so that they'll stay with the cause. And that basically kills all the conversation of people that would like to have conversation that are towards the middle of the road on some of these issues.
Yeah, and we see that, don't we, with in the last few years, it's become common for politicians in Congress to be more concerned about being primaried by one of their own party than the opponent that they face, right?
Exactly, right.
And by the way, I don't know, did you see the news that Georgia did pass something bipartisan along the in reference to the police?
I did not see that.
It was I think it was called the Law Enforcement Support Act, and it had bipartisan support. And it was basically what you were talking about on top of the hill. It's not defunding the police. It is saying, how can we help our police better in reference to law enforcement, in reference to giving them training they need, but also not expecting them to do things that they're not trained for. Right. And this money then is going to local governments to decide how they best want to do that. This is not the state saying you have to do it this way. Here's the money. You all get together because you all know your communities better than anyone else. By the way, that's really federalism that a lot of Republicans used to believe in.
Right, exactly.
Don't seem to at the moment. Right. But you know what's best for your community. So you figure out how you're going to use that money. I mean, I watched that news story the other day, and they were interviewing a Republican and a Democrat on this who was involved in it. And I just thought, oh my gosh, we just don't see this kind of stuff anymore.
Not often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, part of that, let's get back to the subject at hand. Part of that is the ability to speak, the ability to talk with each other, the ability to try and understand each other, and not just close each other off or dismiss each other with labels and slogans. It really is about speech and being able to speak to each other. You made a point before we went on here that I think we need to talk about, and that is, and I'm going to let you define these. That the purpose of liberalism with a capital L, and we need to distinguish that. Right. In reference to free speech, it's not just there's something that modern liberalism with a capital L. Right. In promoting free speech and not saying we're not going to regulate this, there was something they were trying to create. It's not just, it's not keeping something at bay, it's trying to create. So if you could define what is meant by liberalism with a capital L as opposed to a lowercase l, and what is it that modern liberalism is trying to create in reference to safeguarding free speech?
Wow, that's a big one.
Oh, well, I know you can handle
it. I'll put it this way. Let me refer to this example. So 20 years ago, working in the Presbyterian denomination, I was involved with church revisioning projects and go around to churches, take them through a survey, do some stuff, and they try to figure out what they want to do differently in order to change the course of how their church wanted to go. Well, as you, a pastor, know more intimately than anybody else does, anytime you make change, people are going to get upset. There's people that are going to stomp their feet, and some of them will leave. They'll decide that they're going to go elsewhere. Yeah. But anybody who knows that if you're going to change the vision of where a church goes, that you're going to antagonize people, and that change requires that level of stress and crisis in order to birth the new thing that's going to happen. So part of it is dealing with that pastorally and sympathetically, but you do have to make change. Well, the thing is in that model, you're talking about change, is that if a member doesn't like where the church went, they have the option to leave and to go someplace else when that happens. When you're talking about a nation and you have disagreements, and the nation decides to go a different direction or to modify where it's been going in the past, and you have people that disagree, they aren't going anywhere. They are there in society. And the way that the classical liberalism has looked at this was that the way we maintain peace and the ability to be able to function together with strong differences is that no question is ever finally decided. There is always the potential for somebody to come back later to persuade voters, to get votes, to get people that agree with their position, to develop a majority opinion, and then change the decision back. And so the idea is that you needed to be able to have the opportunity for free speech and democratic elections in order for people to be able to persuade each other either directions. The alternative to that is that you have to have some centralized power that is strong enough in order to suppress the people who disagree. And if they develop that much power to suppress the people that disagree, they also begin to suppress all sorts of other things. It's just natural human nature for that to begin. So you can talk about the dysfunction and the chaos that often happens because of classical liberalism, because nothing ever is finally decided, and there is always opportunity to debate. What's your alternative? And so comparing idealistic alternatives to the realistic world of classical liberalism, no, you have to compare the real world alternatives of authoritarianism with the real world of classical liberalism. And in my estimation, classical liberalism wins out every time when you're doing that. And what we end up having is both the left, I think the with the capital L, the liberals and the most extreme end, believe that classical liberalism has underwritten or caused much of the inequality in terms of not just economics, but gender and race and all these other issues, that it has been hand in hand partners with that. And so what we need is a more enlightened group of people who will take over and impose a more just system in terms of how we're supposed to behave to each other and how we're supposed to behave economically. On the conservative side, I think what you see is people who think that classical liberalism has led to moral decay in terms of areas like marriage and sexuality and abortion and these kind of things. And so they say, so classical liberalism didn't work. So now we need to pursue authoritarianism on our end. Now, enough with this voting classical liberalism. We need somebody who will come in and impose the correct order that's supposed to be here. And so I think they're sort of twin pictures of the same thing. And classical liberalism is the idea that we're supposed to be able to debate these topics, to come to, it's never perfect, it's never the whole pie, but it is a way in which you get developed consensus where you get a majority, and the minority always has the opportunity to try to return to change people's opinions. So when I think of classical liberalism and the idea of free speech, and I think it was David French, and maybe I think it's the article maybe we were talking about earlier, he talks about there's sort of three reasons for free speech. The fact is that I may actually be wrong. So therefore I need to listen, to what others have to say, because I may be convinced. The issue is that I may be partly wrong. There could be some, so I need to be hear other ideas to be informed as to how I need to change my views. And then I also need to be able to say what my views are, if I'm right, but I need to be able to have the opportunity to have those views challenged, because that is what will help reinforce fuzzy thinking in my thoughts, and to further strengthen the democracy and the truth that I'm trying to promote if I am right. So no matter whether you're right or wrong, I think the idea of free speech is the sort of it's what creates the possibility for a community to continue to work together as a community in disagreement. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why, by the way, we have elections, because again, if my side loses the previous election, we can always come back and see if we can win the next one. And
Right.
the conversation then continues, albeit maybe in a different kind of way, because our side now has the majority, but we continue the conversation. So classical liberalism, I really want to make this point so folks understand. When we talk about liberalism with a capital L, we don't just mean liberal Democrats. We mean all persons who have bought into the modern ideas associated with classical liberalism. So Ronald Reagan was a liberal with a capital L. It's just that he was on the conservative end of that.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
So in a sense, if you buy into any of this, you are classically liberal with a capital L. Now, I got to tell you, Michael, I've spent many years poking at classical liberalism in many different ways. So to be here supporting it is kind of, but I do agree with the idea of freedom of speech and what it's about and why it's important and necessary for us. Let me talk just a few specifics of recent events, and you can respond to that. So let's talk Dr. Seuss. So back a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, maybe just a year ago, the Dr. Seuss Foundation, which is in charge of Dr. Seuss's books, which is legal, and Dr. Seuss in his will provided for this. They made the decision to no longer publish 3 books of his out of 60 some, whatever it was.
Right.
Mainly because the drawings in them were racial stereotypes.
Right.
Now, it needs to be said, I want to say right at the beginning that those 3 books also were never close to the top of the list of bestsellers. Right. This is not Green Eggs and Ham and the Cat in the Hat. Right.
Right.
Of course. And so once they did this, the cancel culture folks came out of the woodwork, and this is cancel culture, and everybody's buying their books on Amazon because they want it. But that really was a very different animal from, Congress saying you shall not say this. What is the difference there for you?
Again, it was a private decision.
Yeah.
That people who had the ownership rights of those books made regarding to what they want to promote and what they don't want to promote.
Right.
That's about as classical liberal as you get.
Yeah, and that's by the way also the free market at work, isn't it?
Exactly. Exactly.
So for example, I've got a few books I've published. So if you open up any of my books, it will say copyright with my name. So I own the copyright to it.
Right.
But what the publisher does is the publisher who wants to publish the book draws up a contract, and the contract says, for example, all right, we're going to publish your book for 2 years. And, we work out the details of commissions and royalties and all of that kind of thing. I always say when I get my royalty check, I can supersize my lunch.
Right. Right.
But, you get, so we agree with that. Now, at the end of the 2 years, they can say, there's a couple things that can happen. They can say, we would like to publish this another 2 years. We're going to see if you, want to sign a contract for 2 more years. I can say yes.
Right.
I can say no. I can say, no, I think I want to search out another publisher. But the publisher also can say, it's been 2 years, it's been a good run, but we don't think it's financially viable for us to continue this. We're going to move in another direction. This is exactly what the Dr. Seuss Foundation did. The publisher has no obligation to continue to publish a book for me. And so is that cancel culture? Yeah. But this is exactly what happened. They have the rights, and they made the decision, no doubt, based on the changing tide in reference to demographics, but also maybe it was financial as well. Right. That they decided they're not going to publish this. So it really was a poor example of cancel culture. And you wonder why. Oh, we can speculate here. Mm-hmm. Why were those persons who just decried this decision? What was behind that? What was behind that for them? Yeah. Do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I can speculate. I mean, I think there is a general sense that many on the right have of being under siege that they can't promote the things that they heard in the past, and even stuff that they consider to be somewhat innocent, and some of it may be, in terms of the implications of things. They feel like they're constantly under scrutiny, and so therefore they cannot say those things.
Yeah.
And so therefore any incident where somebody sort of tips their hat that direction, that says we're no longer going to use this language, or we're no longer going to promote this idea, they interpret as a personal attack on the values that they have.
Right.
So I think that that's where a lot of it comes. So the cancel culture, I mean, it's kind of like critical race theory and one of these other things. It becomes this thing that becomes this umbrella for describing my frustration with some particular aspect of what's happening in culture. And loses any real meaning in a.
Well, it loses meaning. So if a publisher decides that they're not going to renew my book under contract, should I go online and scream cancel culture? Well, that's kind of silly.
Yeah. Right.
And it does actually take away from the seriousness of restricting free speech when you include everything. It's like, I've got some Quaker friends, and for those of you who are Quakers listening, I love you. But I got Quaker friends who will say, when we talk about sacraments and things, everything is grace. To which I say, if everything is grace, then grace is unimportant. If it's all this, then ultimately it doesn't matter. If everything is cancel culture, then you have really undermined what are legitimate concerns. So let's talk about a few. Whoopi Goldberg recently made a statement about the Holocaust, which was a terrible statement, which the Holocaust was not about race. Anybody who's got a rudimentary understanding of the Holocaust knows that's not true. Right. Now, she did apologize. She came out and apologized. And as a Christian, I think apologies are a good thing, and I think forgiveness is a good thing. Right. And it was a sincere apology. It wasn't, I love the apologies where I'm sorry if I offended anyone. No, that's not an apology. She was sorry for what she said, but she was suspended anyway. Yeah. What do you think? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a hard one. Yeah. I mean, in those circumstances, she wasn't fired.
No, she wasn't fired. She wasn't fired.
I mean, at least that. I do think that it's always tough to gauge, and I'll acknowledge here is very obvious. You and I are both two old white guys too, so we are not.
That's right.
We are not the ones who suffer at the end of prejudice and extremes and views on people who are not male and white. So don't have that emotional, visceral response when people say things like she did. So did there need to be some action that sort of the corporation needed to demonstrate somehow that, other than just accepting apology, that they needed to demonstrate their level of rejection of the way she characterized things? So maybe it might be okay. I do think that there are times where people innocently say things, or things are taken out of context. I'll give you one example from my personal life, and this was not a big public thing, but this was just something in a private sphere with a few other folks. I was talking about the Nordic countries and how we talk about trying to apply the Nordic model of economics to the United States. And the point that I was trying to make is that one of the things that the Nordic countries have that the United States doesn't have is that they tend to be very monocultural. And so the United States is multicultural. You've got all these different languages, different people, ethnic groups. And I had mentioned that in Nordic countries, you go to a country, almost everybody speaks the same language. They all share a common culture. They're all white. They all, well, somebody picked up on that, say, oh, so you're saying that the reason Nordic cultures are better is because they're all white. But that's the reason they see it. And I was like, no, what I said is they're monocultural, and the fact that they're white was just incidental to the fact that that's one of the ways that they're homogeneous, is what I was pointing out. I see that kind of stuff happen occasionally, where you have to be so careful about the precise wording. And even when you are careful, occasionally you're going to say things that can be taken both ways. And the willingness to take things the wrong way and then create a big stir, I think that's where you end up with problems. Goldberg's statement was wrong. I mean, she was clearly wrong, and it's a disturbing way of trying to characterize it. So I guess I don't have big disagreement with the way that it worked out.
Right.
But there are some people who I think have made similar kinds of statements, or even less egregious kind of statements, who've lost their jobs.
Right.
And I think that's where you get into bigger problems.
Yeah, and I think the question that first of all, your point about us being white guys is, if you're a Jew whose grandparents died in the Holocaust, how would you have heard that?
Yeah. Right.
So we always have to remember that we all hear things and we filter them through our own context. Okay.
Right.
So that's one of those issues where, I feel like that's something where I should bow out of the discussion and allow other people who have had experiences with this kind of discrimination that I've not. Right.
Right.
As I always say, to some of my white friends that, it's real easy to white-splain to African Americans what's going on, but, you haven't lived in those shoes. So we need to do more listening than talking. And I think that's really important for us. So, so let's I'm looking at time here. Let's talk about where so okay, so the First Amendment applies to the government, and then the 14th Amendment takes that down to state governments.
Yeah.
So what's going on at some of the state governments that are first of all banning critical race theory that's not even taught in
right.
No one's teaching that. But still, and then you got, I think, Oklahoma, a bill was introduced. I don't think it's been taken up, and I'm guessing it won't be. But somebody introduced a bill that a family can sue a teacher who says something that is opposed to the student's religious views, and they can be sued by that. And of course, my first thought was, well, does that include Hindu students too? Does that include Muslim students?
Right. Yeah.
You also have some proposals about putting. I love the one. Was it Virginia? I don't know who it was, where teachers have to submit their whole year of lessons ahead of time. To which I said, "You obviously have not been a teacher, right?" So there's all this stuff that now that I would say, by the way, I think may violate the 14th Amendment. I think.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I would tread carefully personally. And I'm not a legal scholar, and so I just
what I know about
this.
So just so you all know, neither one of us is a legal scholar.
Exactly right. So
but
everything I say with a grain of salt.
But we still will talk about it.
We'll talk about it, and I have studied some of this. It's not thoroughly foreign to me, but I think the issue with certainly state universities, when you're talking about higher education, there is considerably less that a legislature, I think, can do at a institution of higher education. Partly because I think that's a voluntary, the person chooses to go there, and the state's providing the education, and they go there in order to be able to have that freedom to be able to learn and to engage ideas, that type of thing. Public education is mandatory.
Right.
And so I think there is some level of which parents can have input in terms of trying to shape, what isn't taught. But it has to be, I think, something that is practical in terms of being able to enforce, and for a teacher or an educator to know in advance before they go to do something whether or not they are in violation of what they're being permitted from doing. To say you can't teach critical race theory, and critical race theory is anything that makes white people feel bad about themselves, that's your definition of it. That's an unenforceable law, and I don't see it. It's political posturing is what it is. None of these have been taken to the court. I suspect these laws, I could be wrong, but I suspect these laws would be struck down fairly quickly because they don't provide any practical guidance as to what they mean and how they would be applied.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I also kind of find it ironic that a lot of these folks have been for years calling liberals with a little L snowflakes. So now they're saying, we don't want you teaching anything that'll make my kid feel bad because they're white. Well, that's not really being taught. So, that, by the way, that still continues to manufacture the idea that race matters. So in one sense, they'll tell you race doesn't matter. In another sense, they'll say, don't say anything that makes my white kid feel uncomfortable.
right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So along with that, a couple of things. What about, you mentioned colleges. What about speech codes on campus?
Yeah. I mean, I think there again, you got the same problem.
Yeah.
Universities are supposed to be the place where you exchange ideas and debate, and that's where controversy is supposed to occur. That's part of the reason you go there. That's supposed to be the reason you go there.
Yeah. Now, and that's my concern too, because, look, I know microaggressions. I know the way language functions. I'm one of those geeks that likes linguistics, even though I'm not an expert in it. I know how language functions. I know there are microaggressions that we all can utter, but are we really going to spend time focusing on those microaggressions, or when they pop up in conversation, will we have the conversation about why what you just said in my context grates against me?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, so let's do this. So should we allow a teacher either at the, let's say, high school level or the state college level teach that the Holocaust didn't happen?
There, I think you get into issues of factuality.
Okay.
If you're not teaching, if you're teaching stuff that didn't happen or denying stuff that did happen, then you're not teaching history.
Okay.
So no, I don't.
Yeah.
That's poor. Poor education on that.
So you are saying then that, and I agree with that, is that free speech does have its limits.
Sure it does. Yeah.
And in fact, courts have ruled that down through the decades, that there are certain things that are free speech and certain things that are not free speech.
Right. Now, I should qualify this, and these kind of things disturb me when they do it. If you have a scholar who is dealing with, legitimate sources and trying to raise issues about the magnitude of the Holocaust or something, if there's true scholarly research, I think free speech creates the opportunity for those ideas to be heard, to be aired, and for those who are engaging with them to refute them, and to refute or correct, bad ideas. I think Justice Brandeis, I think, in writing about free speech, he says the answer to wrong speech is not less speech, but more speech.
Right. Exactly.
So when people state stuff that's wrong, the opportunity should be there to correct. And I think that's the other piece that happens with classical liberalism and having open democracy and free speech, is that your ideas, the idea of democracy, for instance, is something that routinely gets challenged from one direction or another over the course of our country. And it is the occasional challenge to democracy is what brings us back to revisit why we have democracy in the first place, what we're doing that builds public consensus again around the idea of democracy. And you don't need power to enforce democracy because everybody then has bought in and they believe it. And so we need these, I shouldn't say we need these, but it is what happens. It's the natural effect of things, is that challenging some of our cherished ideas, to have the ability to have them challenged at times, and then for society to reunite around its core ideas, is what makes society stronger over time.
Which, by the way, is an argument for the importance of character and leadership.
Absolutely.
Because you need people who value, let's call it, in this case, democratic values,
right,
over their party's values or their own power, their own reelection, and that they want to truly seek out the truth. Because if you put people in power who do not have those moral scruples,
Right.
That probably over the long run is probably the biggest danger to democracy, because they're the ones that undermine the institutions.
Sure. I think it cuts, there's a couple of different ways that cut there. One is if you, through good intentions, begin to centralize society, you stifle speech, and you concentrate more power at the top, you guarantee that those who have nefarious values are more interested and attracted in trying to take those positions at the top, because they will now have more power than they otherwise would have in a decentralized, dispersed democratic society. So you're by centralizing things, you're inviting people in who have not the motives we're looking for.
Right.
On the other hand, and I said the other side of that too, is that you also have individuals who work to get elected in order to destroy institutions of accountability, to try to stifle speech and try to disrupt the electoral process in order to get power, to centralize. So the desire to centralize can come from very good motives. It can come from very nefarious motives, but either way, you end up in the same place. And that's why you need classical liberalism.
And that is a problem. I remember, I'm sure as you do as well, the 2000 election, how close it was in the dispute, Florida, the whole disputed election between George Bush and Al Gore, and the Supreme Court, in a divided vote, came down on the side of George Bush. And I still remember, I remember two things. I remember Al Gore doing his famous speech. He talked about disagreeing with the Supreme Court decision, but that he would respect it.
Right.
Which I think was a magnanimously classical liberal thing to do.
Sure was, yeah.
I also remember certain people who could not accept the decision, and for 4 years said, "We have a president who was selected, not elected," and which I always thought that's a great preacherly talking point, and wouldn't refuse to accept it. And I think it's with that 2000 election where the phrase "not my president" started popping up.
Possibly, yeah.
We've seen this. We saw this in 2016 when Donald Trump lost the popular vote, regardless of what he says. And you had people all upset about that. Not my president, to which I said, yes, he is the president, because we have something called the Electoral College. Now, you may not like it. Right. You may want to get rid of it, and there are processes for doing that. But the reality is, according to the way our institutions have worked from the beginning, yes, you can be president and lose the popular vote. So stop this "not my president" stuff.
Yeah, right.
Because that's the way this works. Yeah. And when you start putting your own interests ahead of the way things work, and again, we have a way to change these things if you don't like them. There are processes in place. It's when we start putting our own interests ahead of a larger interest as to why these things are put in place in the first place, I think we run afoul if we're not careful.
Right, exactly. And I just followed some of this conversation up with sort of a broader thing that I thought about a lot with some of these topics, and particularly what's been going on the past 5 or 6 years in terms of how the church and its relation to politics and it has been developing. There's a sociologist, Robert Merton, who wrote mid-century, last century. He distinguished between authority and power. And he talked about with power is the ability to compel people to do what you want them to do, even against their will. And he talked about authority being the ability to get people to follow your will because of your particular care, your interest, and engagement with them, to the point that they want to follow you. They alter their will to conform with your will. And that's the reason they want to go that direction. And when I think about the distinction between those two, and you look at who Jesus was and how Jesus was teaching his disciples to transform the world, love your enemies, self-sacrificial love, unjustified grace, to others, that even to the point of going to the cross, was the idea that we are to lead with authority and not power. And the fact is that the authority is what transforms the world. It's what transforms people. Power is what can keep things status quo in the moment, but it is always tenuous. It is never ultimately successful in keeping control. And I should point out, Merton, as anybody else would say, it can never be exclusively one or the other. There is a legitimate need for power in society. Fallen human being, you need some of that. But I think that this whole idea about cancel culture and anti-democracy, looking for authoritarian ways, is the church having abdicated the idea of the suffering servant, the one who loves in order to transform, in order to seize power, to impose what their view of society is on the culture. And that's what's going to kill the church in the long run, if that view pervades, kill the church in the U.S.
Right. Yeah. By the way, I have a perfect story to illustrate your discussion about authority and power. Back during the Clinton administration, little Mother Teresa was in the United States, all 4'7" or whatever she was. And she and President Clinton and Hillary Clinton shared a stage together for something. I don't remember what it was. But the first thing those who were there noticed is that the minute she walked out onto the stage, this little tiny woman, everybody got quiet, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And during the speech, she spoke about the culture of death, and she specifically referenced abortion.
Right.
And of course, here's Bill and Hillary Clinton on stage, who are pro-choice.
Yeah.
And she talks about this. And then afterward, a reporter, of course, was going to ask the president the question. So this reporter asked President Clinton what he thought of her comments on abortion. And his only response was, "You can't argue with her life." Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
This is authority.
Yeah.
Right?
That's authority. Yeah.
This is authority. I'm sure he still didn't agree with her, but this is authority. This is not, This is someone who is listened to and has respect because she has embodied, if you will, what you just said, a suffering servant.
Right.
And it's hard to argue with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Christianity, so we got to get there as our last segment here. So we're both Christians. We follow Jesus. One of the things I believe as a Christian is that we should seek after the truth. I think that's the one thing that if we believe Jesus is the truth, all truth comes from God, then the truth should not scare us. Sometimes it might deeply trouble us, but that doesn't mean it'll scare us. And I think part of seeking the truth is my willingness to listen to different voices, and not just other different Christian voices, but other voices. I'll tell you what, I've had great discussions over the years with friends who are Muslim, with friends who are atheists, others who are agnostic. And I just feel like as a Christian, one of my tasks is to discern the truth. And of course, I know there's going to be lots of questions this side of eternity I won't answer. But the worst thing I can do is go into my little bubble and reject listening to anyone who's got a different perspective than mine. So I think as a Christian, by the way, so let me say this, as a Christian, I think I owe conversation with other people who are different. What do you think?
Absolutely. And the passage in Ephesians where we often interpret it, speaking the truth in love.
Yeah.
I know nothing about Greek, but one scholar is reading was saying that the language doesn't translate directly there in Greek. He says a better translation, which doesn't fit exactly in English, might be, we are to be truthing in love.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting. It's not just a matter of our speech. It's the entire character of our life, what we say, our engagement with others, that is the communication and evidence of the truth that is supposed to be happening. So it matters how we may be right about a topic, but it matters how we go about promoting the truth of that topic. And that's where the point is that I see with the church. And I'm right now, I mentioned sort of the conservative side of the church and sort of going to authoritarianism. But I have seen, I'm in a PC USA liberal denomination. Okay. This is on the liberal side just as well.
Yep.
The same sort of thing. There's this antagonism. There isn't love for people that some people disagree with. And so it becomes this power trip to try to get other people to conform to the will that you have for the way things should be.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that is, and that's what we are put here for, is to be communicating the truth and love through by being the witness. We are the ambassadors. Our churches are little embassies in this world for the kingdom of God, and we're supposed to be giving witness and example of what the coming kingdom looks like.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And we do need to say that, look, this is not just a problem on one side of the political or theological aisle or the other. I think we've had focus of late on the more conservative side because, as I have said in other venues, Donald Trump presents to us a different kind of animal from what we've normally seen. And so we're emphasizing that. But the left, look, I remember back, you remember when Lawrence Summers, who was Clinton's former economic advisor, was president. I want to say, was it Harvard or Yale? It was one of the two.
Thinking Harvard, but I'm not
sure. Was it Harvard? Yeah, probably so. Harvard. But neurologists from Harvard, two of them, a woman and a man, by the way, came out with a study basically in which their studies confirmed that the male brain and the female brain were different. Mm-hmm. They were different. And the left went bananas because for them, this signified inequality, right?
Right.
Now, they had no scientific research to point to that they were right. And the neurologist rightly said, to say the male and female brain have different tendencies is not to say they're not equal, just to say they have different tendencies, right?
Yeah, right, yeah.
But he lost his job over that.
Yeah, right.
And so this was an example, if this is from the left, that was a clear example of cancel culture, that you didn't allow science to do its work. Now, maybe they were wrong, but that's what peer review is for, right?
Right, exactly.
So they should have let them do the work. But boy, I can remember the students and activists just all upset. And Summers made the terrible mistake of trying to defend the research, right?
Right. Yeah,
which he was right to do.
Right.
And so he lost his job. So you get this on both sides, theologically too.
Yeah.
Another thing about being a Christian in reference to this are two things that I think sometimes are in tension with each other. The first is the importance of civility, the importance of being able to have a conversation without name calling, without dismissing, without, really be able to engage on a thoughtful level with people we disagree with. But at the same time, and here's where the tension is, trying to navigate through perspectives that actually are quite dangerous, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I saw somebody posted a meme, something that it was something like, I'm going to get it wrong, but it's something like, if you don't like coffee, we have a difference of opinion. But when it comes to racism and sexism, et cetera, this is not a difference of opinion. This is a matter of justice or something like that.
Right.
So at some point in conversation in reference to free speech, where do we engage people in conversation and where do we just say, you know what? I'm not doing this. This is because, your views are inherently unjust. We'll say it that way.
Yeah. So you mean what you're asking me? What I think our response?
Yeah. How do you what do you think about that kind of thing?
To me, on those type of topics where you have somebody who I think has got a position that's totally anathema to the truth or to morality, it's situation by situation. It's who I am, who the individual is. Do we have a relationship? Do we have a rapport to be able to have a conversation with a complete stranger? It's probably not worth with the engagement because there's no buildup of what I would say capital between us in terms of being able to have something that we can work on. But I think that there's no neat formula that solves, how we deal all this. And this is where I think as Christians, we talk about the role of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit in guiding some of this. that there are times to speak and other times not to speak. And I
Right.
think that on the one hand, while I've talked about, truthing and love, that also truthing and love sometimes means speaking out when injustice has been said and injustice has been done, and being critical of people who
Yeah.
have said it. So you're on one hand trying to be truthful and speak out for those who are the suffering at the end of untruths, but then you're also trying to be loving and trying to figure out how it is that you how you dissuade somebody who has
Yeah.
a negative view to come to a new viewpoint.
Yeah.
Those two often seem to be in tension. They feel like they are in tension with each other.
Yeah. I've never forgotten when an African American friend of mine said to me a few years ago, civility can give the oppressor the upper hand.
Right. Yeah, sure. That's right.
And he was right. So, I mean, I do believe civility is the norm. And I think that's the way we ought to be. But, maybe Jesus had something in mind when he turned over a few tables.
Exactly.
And the Matthew 23 passage where Jesus goes after the religious leaders. I can't tell you the number of parishioners I have had over the years who read Matthew 23 for the first time and were shocked. Because they had this idea of gentle Jesus, meek and mild,
Right. Yeah.
Hardly meek and mild there. But it takes discernment, doesn't it? I mean, it really does. And you talk about the Spirit, the leading of the Spirit.
Yeah.
Is when do I, in the norm of civility, when do I finally say,
Right.
And I think, again, it's how we hear it in different contexts. That same African-American friend of mine said to me one time that he was just tired of all of this civility and talk when it comes to race. He says, because we've been dealing with this for 400 years and
Sure.
we're still dealing with it. To which I said to him, I'm in no position to tell you otherwise, right? I am in no position to disagree with you.
Right.
All I know is that I'm not going to persuade anybody if I'm not civil, if I'm not,
Right.
Gracious, etc. But listen, I take his point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right,
it's
Michael.
It's a difficult tension to live in. Yeah.
It's a difficult tension to live in. So we do need to listen more to one another. It comes back to that. There's a lot of noise for all of us, and I'm certainly. I mean, I write and speak for a living, so
Yeah.
I'm including myself in this. That we really all need to do more listening and being willing to listen to different voices. I mean, that's the thing. I'm very concerned. I mean, I know all the studies about confirmation bias and that we all lean toward this. We all tend toward those ideas that we find congenial. But we have to be willing to get out of our comfort zones and be able to hear other voices and not just read, watch, or whatever, those who confirm us. And boy, that's tough. That can be tough because there are certain things I read at times, and I try intentionally to seek out those different voices. There are times when I'm reading stuff that's grating against me when I'm reading it.
Yeah.
But I like what you said earlier about the fact that in freedom of speech and democracy, the reality is one of the reasons we talk to each other is because in conversation, I might be wrong.
Yeah.
Right? And so I don't want to be wrong. Well, the only way I'm going to figure that out is to have conversation with people.
Somebody can challenge me.
Someone who can challenge me.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, thank you again for this great conversation that we have had, and just appreciate your insights. And we'll be back next month in March. We had talked about climate change next month. Well, we talked about it this month, but this cancel culture thing got big. So maybe we can do climate change. Again, neither one of us is a climate scientist, but that doesn't mean we can't talk about it.
It's never stopped me.
It's never, we can just as long, it's just, what was the old commercial? Was it for aspirin or something? I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
We say, look, we're not climate scientists, but we're still have conversation, but we read and we reflect and,
The Holiday Inn had the commercial that said, I'm not a doctor, but I did stay at Holiday Inn Express last night.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been at a Holiday Inn Express, I'm not a climate scientist, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express. Yeah. So anyway, those are very flimsy reasons, but we'll talk about it anyway.
Yeah.
It's an important discussion. It's an important conversation to have. So sort of, and we'll do our typical reading ahead of time and try and bone up on. And if nothing else, at least I won't speak for you, but I'll speak for myself. At least I can sound that I know what I'm talking about at the very least. Remember that old bumper sticker, if you can't dazzle them with your brilliance, baffle them, and I won't finish the bumper sticker. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
All right, my friend. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. I am Allan Bevere with Michael Cruz, and here at Faith Seeking Understanding, our patron saint is Anselm of Canterbury, who said, I do not I do not believe in order to, get it right. He is the patron saint, Michael. I do not understand in order to believe, but I believe in order to understand. All right, folks, have a great day. All right. I just need to make sure I end this without cutting you off.
That's fine.